Learning outcome. An adjudication decision that the questions for this court's determination are as follows. Question 1. Brief facts. The appellant, Econpile, M. Sdn, first adjudication decision. In the first adjudication decision, Econpile was awarded. The court made, inter alia, the following findings in dismissing the stay application. The fact that, however, ASM appealed to the Court of Appeal where ASM's appeal of setting aside an enforcement orders was not granted, but the appeal against the dismissal of the stay application, stay order. Second adjudication decision. Econpile initiated further adjudication proceedings in respect of separate progress claims, and the adjudicator decided that ASM is to pay Econpile a sum of Rm 5,959,024.99. Sec. ASM appealed to the Court of Appeal against the granting of the enforcement order and dismissal of the setting aside and stay orders. All three appeals were dismissed by the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal, on arriving before the federal court, there were two appeals were heard arising from the first adjudication proceedings and second adjudication proceedings. In the appeal arising from the first adjudication proceedings there were two questions for the court's determination. As for the appeal arising from the second adjudication proceedings, the questions were as follows. Is the financial capacity to repay test the determinative criteria in considering an application for stay pursuant to Section 16 of CIPAA in view of the liberalized interpretation on the ground of justice of the case by the federal court in View Esteem in light of the conflicting decisions by the Court of Appeal in ASM Development, KL, Sdn Bhd v Econpile, M. Sdn Bhd and other appeals 2022-6 ML. The federal court's focus for determination was whether the existence of a valid enforcement order made pursuant to Section 28 of CIPAA precluded the making of a stay order pursuant to Section 16, 1, of CIPAA. Intention of Parliament in legislating CIPAA. The federal court did not agree with the Court of Appeal's reasons for granting the stay order pursuant to the first adjudication proceedings. The court investigated the Hansard to better understand and appreciate the intention of Parliament in legislating CIPAA, where the court referred to an excerpt from the Hansard which inter alia provided that at that time, prior to coming into force of CIPAA, when there is a payment dispute, the options available to parties were either reference to court or arbitration. However, due to the cost and time taken to resolve the disputes by way of court or arbitration, the parties were restrained from resolving their dispute through these forums. CIPAA, on the other hand, gives parties an option to resolve their disputes quickly and at a lower cost. The court noted that it was further stated in the Hansard that the Cabinet had agreed during its meeting on July 15, 2009 that a specific act be enacted to overcome payment issues and to assist parties in the construction industry to resolve payment disputes. The federal court further focused on the rules of statutory interpretation by looking at Section 17A of the Interpretation Acts 1948 and 1967, which provides that in interpreting an act, the construction promoting the purpose or object of the legislation shall be preferred to a construction that would not do so. Several cases on statutory interpretation of CIPAA were referred to by the court. They include ACFM Engineering and Construction Sdn Bhd v Star Vision Sdn Bhd and another appeal 2016 1 LNS 1522, where David Wong Dak Wah, JCA, as he then was, explained inter alia the philosophy underlying CIPAA. His lordship observed that to make the construction industry a fair playing field, an adjudication regime should be introduced in which interim claims made by subcontractors can be dealt with in a speedy and economical manner, just as Parliament in various Commonwealth countries have done. His lordship added that the benefit of such regime is plain and obvious in that claims of subcontractors, being the lifeline of their survival, must not be delayed by the contractor without valid reasons. The federal court also referred to the long title of CIPAA, which states that the process as provided under the Act is to facilitate regular and timely payment, to provide a mechanism for speedy dispute resolution through adjudication, to provide remedies for the recovery of payment in the construction industry, and to provide for connected and incidental matters. The court referred to the federal court case of Martego Sdn Bhd v Architect Mir and Chu, the principles of governing stay in View Esteem case. The federal court recalled the principles governing stay applications as propounded previously by the federal court in View Esteem after having considered the intention and objectives of CIPAA. Unlike the approach taken by the High Court and Court of Appeal in that case, in View Esteem, the court took a less stringent approach in granting a stay. The federal court in View Esteem noted that the High Court there held that stay can only be allowed in exceptional circumstances. The Court of Appeal held that a stay ought to be granted only if there was overwhelming evidence that the contractor would be unable to meet its contractual obligations and financial obligations to the employer. The federal court in View Esteem disagreed with the approach taken by the High Court and the Court of Appeal on the following basis. Section 16 of the CIPAA contains no such limiting requirement or intent. The scheme in each jurisdiction is different. Other jurisdictions do review of the adjudication awards and a stay application is made only when the other avenues are exhausted. Instead, the federal court held that the right to apply for a stay should be treated as a safeguard to a likely wrongful adjudication decision, which empowers the court to find a suitable middle ground in cases where there have been clear and unequivocal errors. The federal court further states that the Malaysian courts are allowed greater flexibility under the CIPAA to stay the adjudication award where there are clear errors or to meet the justice of the individual case. The federal court referred to Section 16 of CIPAA, which expressly stipulates the circumstances under which a party can apply for a stay of the adjudication decision. The court noted that an adjudication decision can only be set aside in exceedingly rare circumstances so that effect can be given to the provisional resolution of payment disputes in construction contract. The court then noted that the adjudication decisions in the appeals before the court were not set aside and remain intact, and the High Court had correctly granted the enforcement orders. The federal court referred to Econpile Sdn Bhd v Puri Sdn Bhd 2019 to MLJ 362, where the Court of Appeal observed that the applicant in an application to enforce the adjudication decision is not required to show that there are no grounds for setting aside the adjudication decision. The applicant only needs to satisfy the High Court that the adjudication decision was made in the applicant's favor and that there had been a failure by the respondent to pay the adjudicated sum by the date specified in the adjudication decision. On the interpretation and construction of CIPAA, the federal court is of the view that the intent and object of CIPAA is an important factor which the court cannot ignore. The correct approach under CIPAA is to uphold the adjudicator's decision unless there are jurisdiction issues or breaches of natural justice. The adjudicator's decisions are binding on the parties unless reversed by a court. The only defense to enforceability is if the findings offended the principles of natural justice or if the adjudicator lacked jurisdiction and, on that basis, the decision is set aside. The federal court noted that there was no ambiguity in the provisions relating to setting aside and enforcement under CIPAA. The court was of the view that there is no provision for a stay of adjudication decision after an enforcement order has given. The court relied on the principles of interpretation of statutes in finding that in the absence of a specific provision, the court is not statutorily empowered to grant a stay if the adjudication decision is not set aside, as to do so would be incongruent to the intent and purpose of CIPAA. The court found that the Court of Appeal in the first adjudication proceedings had acted more than its jurisdiction when it granted the stay when the adjudication decision was not set aside. The court reiterated that the adjudication decision must be complied with unless it has been set aside under Section 16 of CIPAA, as any other construction and interpretation would defeat the purpose, object and intent of CIPAA. As to the issue of the stay principles enunciated in View Esteem, the federal court reiterated that the said principles must be followed in a stay application if an application for setting aside has been made or the subject matter is pending final determination by arbitration or the court. The court then concluded that for the reasons already given, it was unnecessary to answer the questions posed in the appeal arising from the second adjudication proceedings. The court then answered the first question in the negative and the second question in the affirmative in relation to the appeal arising from the first adjudication proceedings. Conclusion. It is to be noted that enforced cannot be stayed. An adjudication decision after having been enforced pursuant to S28 CIPAA as an order of the court cannot be stayed pursuant to S16, 1b, CIPAA. Application to set aside AD made before stay application. An application for a stay of an adjudication decision pursuant to S16 CIPAA if an application to set aside the adjudication decision under S15 of the same Act has been made or the subject matter of the adjudication decision is pending null determination by arbitration or the court. Include AD not set aside regardless of enforced or not. The court has also extended the restriction on granting stay orders to include any adjudication decision that has not been set aside regardless of whether the decision has been enforced. Purpose and intent of CIPAA. Whilst the court has made it clear that the more flexible approach propounded in View Esteem in granting stay applications ought to be adhered to, the court remains cognizant of the purpose of CIPAA, which is to address cash flow issues in the construction industry.